Okay, so this Sudetenland crisis has got Europe preparing for imminent war. In an attempt to avoid that, there is an emergency peace conference called, and it is held in Munich on the 29th of September 1938. And I'll write that down so we've got a record of it. 29th of the 9th. You can see there, we recognise some of the faces. It is a meeting between Britain, Germany, France, but also Italy present now as well. Mussolini is present at the Munich conference. The two countries that are notably absent, first of all, this is considering the future of Czechoslovakia, and Beneš is not invited. And the other key power in Europe, the USSR and leader Joseph Stalin, are not invited. What we are going to see is an agreement is reached to avoid war. And actually, considering his reputation generally, the general reaction to Chamberlain is one of a hero who has avoided war. Chamberlain comes home after the Munich Agreement, and he tells the people of Britain, I hold in my hand a piece of paper, and he holds it up, and he says that declares peace in our time. And the reason he says that is because the Munich Agreement not only gave Hitler everything he wanted and gave in to Hitler's demands that he could have all of the Sudetenland with no election, so that the people of Czechoslovakia wouldn't have a say. So not only does it give Hitler everything he wanted, but the agreement has a clause agreed between Britain and Germany that says it is symbolic of the desire of our two peoples never to go to war with one another again. And so the reaction is that Chamberlain is a national hero who has avoided war. Spoiler alert, 12 months later, Germany invades Poland and the Second World War begins. So in the short term, he's viewed as a hero. A year later, the Munich Agreement has failed. So as a result of the Munich Agreement, not only is Chamberlain flying home to a hero's reception, on the 1st of October, German troops march unopposed into the Sudetenland without even firing a shot. Beneš, humiliated and betrayed, resigns as the leader of Czechoslovakia. Now, Chamberlain's reaction, or the reaction to Chamberlain back home, is so excited in Britain because he seemed to have avoided war. Opinion polls did show that the British people believed that appeasement wasn't working, but the general feeling in Britain was one of relief that war had been avoided. So they're not celebrating a victory for appeasement necessarily, because people now generally in Britain believe Hitler cannot be trusted. What they're celebrating is that a war has been avoided. Chamberlain has come home and there will not be war in Europe for the time being. Chamberlain isn't totally foolish. Some people like to paint Chamberlain out to be this character that totally misunderstood Hitler, misunderstood his intentions, and I think a lot of people did so at the time. It wasn't just Chamberlain that misunderestimated him. I've just think I've invented a new word, misunderestimated. Let's stick with underestimated. Chamberlain wasn't the only person that underestimated Hitler. When Chamberlain gets back to Britain, he doesn't just go back to Britain and wave his piece of paper and think everything's all right again. Upon his return, he approves massive increase in spending on arms to prepare Britain for war. So even though Chamberlain in public is holding up this piece of paper declaring peace in our time, he is also at the same time preparing his country for war, which to me shows that he is expecting conflict with Hitler in the future. And this is what some historians argue. Some historians argue that appeasement wasn't just an attempt to maintain peace, but to buy Britain time to prepare for conflict, to get it on a war footing, to get the country ready for when war came. In the press, there was generally a celebratory mood. This is from the Daily Express. Peace agreement signed at 12:30 a.m. today. German troops marching tomorrow. Occupation gradually until October the 19th. The Daily Express said, "People of Britain, your children are safe. If we must have a victor, let us choose Chamberlain." The Daily Sketch, another paper which is popular in England or Britain at the time, you will find it in your textbooks on page 281. The Daily Sketch says, "Give thanks in church tomorrow." So it is a celebration that war has been avoided. However, it is not overwhelmingly the case that people are celebrating. First of all, in October 1938, in a speech to the House of Commons, Winston Churchill, who is a Conservative but an opponent of Chamberlain, says, "We have suffered a total defeat. This is only the beginning of the reckoning." So what Churchill is predicting is that this is the beginning of Hitler's ambitions, that he won't stop there, that he will try and invade the rest of Czechoslovakia and then on to Poland. Churchill's prediction is correct. This is only the beginning of the steps to war. Interesting that two politicians from the same party have such a very different point of view. And in this case, when Chamberlain resigns in 1940 because his attempts to keep peace have failed, somebody like Churchill, who has been so opposed to that policy, is to some people the perfect replacement because it's a dramatic change in how Britain is gonna treat and meet with Hitler. It's not just Churchill in the House of Commons. In December, so we're talking a good 2.5 months after the agreement is signed, the Yorkshire Post said, "Mr. Chamberlain's policy has throughout been based on a fatal misunderstanding of the psychology of dictatorship." And so I don't want you to go away thinking that this is overwhelmingly supported in Britain. The general mood is one of celebration, not for the policy, but for the fact that war seemed a guarantee and has now been avoided. However, there is this counter-argument from people like Winston Churchill, from papers like the Yorkshire Post, that are now openly opposing the policy and predicting that it's going to fail. Okay, I'm now going to run through some. Now we've looked at the crisis and the Munich Agreement. I'm now going to run through some exam questions that you could have a go at. This cartoon, as you can see in the corner, is a David Lowe cartoon. We can see his signature in the corner. It's from July of 1938. So this is before the Sudeten crisis has really kicked off. Remember that at this time, Hitler has basically sort of hinted at his desire for Czechoslovakia, but hasn't really come out and said it yet. And even then, he's talking about the Sudetenland. Now, what we can see, David Lowe has a man reading the newspaper saying to himself, "What is Czechoslovakia to me anyway?" Basically reflecting this British mood that, and Chamberlain said it himself. Chamberlain said, "This is a quarrel in a faraway country of people we know nothing about." David Lowe is criticising that attitude. David Lowe has got this British person reading his newspaper. What does it mean to me anyway? In the background, we can see some rocks, some boulders, quite precariously placed. Now, there is a rope tied around a very small rock, which is Czechoslovakia. The other rocks are named Poland, Romania, and French alliances, and then ultimately at the top, Anglo-French security. And so what it's suggesting is that when that first rock is pulled, the other rocks are going to fall on top of the person who is ignorant of that, sat reading his paper. He doesn't know what's behind him. The question that you could do is a 4-mark question. This source opposes the policy of appeasement. How do you know? 4 marks. And then you stick to your usual style. You stick to your PCC. You've got your provenance. I've told you the author. I've told you when it was made. I've gone through the content. The thing that you need to be careful of is context. Because it was made in July, this is before the Munich Agreement. This is before the meeting between Chamberlain and Hitler. This is taking place actually after Hitler says, I will fight for Czechoslovakia if I have to. So in May of 1938, Hitler says, if I have to fight for Czechoslovakia and rescue the people in the Sudeten area, I will do. So just be careful when you talk about context of what was going on at that time. Don't talk about things that haven't happened yet in September. 2 more questions you could do. You could do an 8-mark question. Write an account of how the Sudetenland crisis caused tension in Europe in 1938. So no sources needed for that. You write your account, your 2 paragraphs. You talk about, first of all, the Sudeten crisis in the early months and people preparing for war, and then the Munich Agreement in the 2nd paragraph, and talk about how that contributed to a later crisis as well. So the 8-marker could be write an account of how the Sudetenland crisis caused tension in Europe in 1938. The final question you can do for now, we can't do a 16-marker yet because we haven't finished the course, but you could look at these 2 sources and you could do a how useful question. How useful are these 2 sources concerning attitudes in Britain towards the Munich Agreement? When it comes to provenance, you've got in source 29 a national newspaper writing on the day after the announcement. So this is a national newspaper's immediate reaction. For the second one, source 30, it's a regional newspaper. So it's going to have a smaller audience, and also it's in December 1938. So it's not an immediate reaction to the policy. It's 2 months afterwards. And it's coming after politicians like Winston Churchill have come out in the House of Commons and opposed it. So it's a less immediate reaction. When it comes to content, pick your key quote. For me, I like this repetition of your children are safe, your husbands and your sons will not march. If we must have a victor, let us choose Chamberlain. For me, for the content, what this tells us is that there was a very real fear in September 1938 of war, and that there is a national mood of celebration and relief that war has been avoided. And there it says, if you must have a victor, let us choose Chamberlain. It shows that the immediate reaction from a majority of the British people was one of relief and celebration and support for Chamberlain's decision. For the Yorkshire Post, Chamberlain as a courage, digression. Mr. Chamberlain's policy has throughout been based on a fatal misunderstanding of the psychology of dictatorship. Gives us, in terms of content, a very different perspective of this policy and a very different view of Chamberlain. For your contextual knowledge, you could bring Winston Churchill in and say that he had opposed what was going on as well. Remember that in your conclusion, when you take these 2 together, it is how useful they are combined, not which is more useful than the other. So if you get a question like this where they have very different points of view, you don't have to say, I think this is more useful than the other. What you have to do is take them together. And for me, what it shows is that the immediate national reaction was one of relief, but over time, different points of view began to emerge. So there you go. You've got a 4, an 8 and a 12 marker to do. Lucky you. We have got just a couple more lessons, 1 or 2 things to go through. We've got the invasion of Czechoslovakia and then this very weird agreement, the Nazi-Soviet Pact, and then the invasion of Poland, and that is the outbreak of the Second World War. So we've got 3 topics to do, and that's the GCSE finished.